Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast, where we're all about commander, data, and dad jokes. I'm Joey Schultz and I'm joined by my fantastic co-hosts. Up first, he can't wait to give an attacking jumbo cactuar lifelink to gain 10,000 life. It's Matt Morgan.
So my partner recently asked me before we went out, how do you think I look? And I learned that the wrong answer is, well, with your eyes.
Wait, but that's correct, though. Actually, that's correct. That's true, Matt.
Technically correct is the best kind of correct, Matt.
But it wasn't the right kind of correct, and therefore I found out exactly how lumpy the couch downstairs was.
Okay, fantastic. Up next, he can't wait to fling an attacking jumbo cactuar to make someone else lose 10,000 life. It's Dana Roach.
I saw something recently that if you win the lottery, 24% of the winnings are withheld for federal taxes immediately. And I did the math on that, and if you won $1 billion, you'd be the first billionaire ever to actually pay taxes.
Ooh, feisty, Dana. I like it.
I mean, I thought we were going to dodge any political questions, but I guess that's out of the window.
Ooh, boy. Okay, we're all in a feisty mood today, which is perfect. Given the topic that we have here today, where we're talking about some banned stuff.
Mm-hmm. We do want to take a moment to reevaluate a conversation we had recently, where we did talk about the commander bans and the ban list and all the cards that exist on it. A lot has changed in that 3 months that we had that last conversation, so we wanted to take a chance to reevaluate the ban list with the context of the game changer list existing now.
Heck yeah, we got some shout outs to do before we get into it, though.
We are excited to be teamed up with Dragon Shield. Their sleeves come in dozens of colors or art variants, and their sleeve crafter tool at dragonshield.com is excellent, letting you design personalized sleeves for your Magic collection. And if you were at MagicCon Chicago, you might have gotten a chance to see our own personalized sleeves. If you click on the link in the description below, you get 5% off any Dragon Shield product. It makes your purchase cheaper, and it supports the show. Dragon Shield, your deck's own personal force field.
Heck yeah.
And if you'd like to support the show, you can subscribe on YouTube, liking this video. You can subscribe to your local podcast app and leave a review over there as well. You can head to patreon.com/EDHRECast. You can get all these episodes a day early. You can see all of our historic challenge stats picks. There's all that and more over at patreon.com/EDHRECast, including the coveted patron shout out. So this week we are going to give a very special shout out to Scott Forba, who did not forego their opportunity. This was really bad. Me trying to ham it was very much a mistake.
And also, EDHREC started doing a weekly interview show called What's Up, hosted by writer Andy Zupke at twitch.tv/EDHRECast at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern on Tuesdays. And March's guest list includes ultra artist Eric Klug, the great Gavin Verhey, who we just talked to recently, and Niall Joan Rivers.
Heck yeah. Okay, guys, let's get into our topic here. We're talking about potential commander unbans in a post-EDH brackets world. With the introduction of the brackets and the game changers, there's been a lot of talk from folks at Wizards of the Coast about them potentially unbanning some cards that would then go onto the game changer list. And this is something that has been hinted at a handful of times. Gavin actually mentioned it on that episode that he was on when y'all interviewed him as well. So we kind of wanted to get hypothesizing a little bit about which cards might be on the radar there, which cards might end up getting unbanned and become game changers if this bracket system is successful.
And Matt kind of alluded to the fact that we've talked about this in the past, but like when we last discussed this, it was in a world where it was a very binary ban system, right? Like a card was either not played or you could play it kind of anywhere for the most part. And with the advent of this current bracket system we have now, things are much more nebulous. You can technically unban something, but also avoid playing against it if it's the kind of card that's a game changer or shows up at it is a certain power level thing that like is only going to show up in a certain bracket. Makes it much easier for WotC to unban some cards, but still have them maybe not be a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the added layer of just how things are going to get regulated, I very much appreciate, and I think it's going to be a boon for the format in the long run. That's something that I'm very excited to see how it plays out. And I think another big caveat that we need to throw out there that Gavin also mentioned when we got a chance to talk to him was there's no way that you're ever going to get rid of bad actors who are going to play to kind of the letter of the law, as they say. They're always going to be out there. They're going to be playing cards and decks where they probably shouldn't be. And so it's really hard to kind of say, in the context of this conversation we're going to have, okay, well, this would work, but also bad actors. That's just kind of something we can get out of the way now, I think, because otherwise we're going to repeat it quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Matt, a very good thing to point out there too. And I'll also probably throw in here that Wizards has said that they are discussing unbans, but not discussing anything getting further banned in the future as well. So there'll be some updates coming up, and we're just kind of curious what those updates might look like. I think this topic was kind of inspired by the fact that on the interview that we had with Gavin, he actually named a banned card as an example here that kind of kickstarts our episode. He named Coalition Victory, a spell that can win you the game if you meet certain conditions. He named it as one of his favorite examples of a card that could be removed from the ban list and put onto the Game Changers list if it is only going to show up in certain brackets or levels of play. It's a card that isn't necessarily the most powerful thing that you could be doing in, say, CEDH, but it also isn't necessarily suitable for lower tiers, I suppose you could say, of play either. The more social tiers is a more proper way to say it. Mm-hmm. So that is an example that he provided, and that kind of got us all thinking. And so we want to talk about that card and several more. I guess we'll get started with Coalition Victory. What do you guys feel about cards like that and whether they should turn into game changers instead of bans?
So for those who don't remember, Coalition Victory is a sorcery spell. It costs 8 mana, so it's 3 and Wooburg. And it just says, you win the game if you control a land of each basic type and a creature of each color. Now, a 5-color creature satisfies that, and lands with multiple types satisfy that. So technically, a 5-color creature and a couple of tri-lands gets you there.
So I am probably the person who's come around the most on Coalition Victory. The last time that we had this conversation, I was pretty forceful in thinking that this will never be unbanned. The reason behind that was because we keep getting so many cards that make it easier and easier to win the game out of nowhere with these types of effects. A single Overlord of the Hauntwoods and Leyline of the Guild Pact, I mean, that pretty much does the job right there for you. So it truly does become a win out of nowhere. And so I very much was in the camp that it's never going to get unbanned. I think now, in the light of having game changes around there where there's an extra layer of regulation and safety, this actually seems like a very, very feasible option to come back where it's going to stick in the high power level tables, but it's not going to find a way to get down too low because people are going to see those game changers. And ideally, they're going to stick fairly strictly to that.
For me, I think the big sin of this card is the anticlimax that it invites into the game. It's just like, oh, things are just over, I guess. And granted, sometimes a Torment of Hailfire can even have that effect on a game. Occasionally as well, not all of the time. So to me, it's just about like, the game kind of ended in a way that doesn't feel great. But I do kind of agree that while that doesn't feel suitable for the bracket 2 levels of play, me feeling like it's anticlimactic, does it still feel anticlimactic enough to be a problem still, even if it's in the bracket 3 level of play where you can play up to 3 game changers in your deck? This strikes me as a pretty likely unban, to be honest. I'm not necessarily happy about it, because I still just don't like the card very much.
Sure.
But yeah, it actually does strike me as a thing that Wizards probably will make some move on.
Yeah, I'm kind of on board with the notion that I can very much see it get unbanned. I also don't think it's a problem. At high power tables, that's 8 mana. That's a lot of mana. And people will run interaction that will probably prevent it from being something that wins games. So it shows up at lower power tables then, and you have to have enough stuff in play to make it win games, even with tri-lands. Stuff has to be out. So the worst case scenario for it is a game just ends. And if the worst case scenario is it's like getting nothing but white socks for Christmas, okay, whatever. That's disappointing, but
you still got socks.
That's not the worst.
Right,
I guess it's not the worst thing in the world. But also, if that's the best case scenario, I'm like, well, why unban it then? If the best case scenario was games end in a disappointing fashion, that's such a weak upside. But the fact that it's not going to cause problems also makes me pretty ambivalent. Whatever, I kind of don't care.
I think that the ending in a disappointing way too, we need to qualify as disappointing from the,
to me. Right.
To the two of you. I think there is definitely a crowd that, again, that's why CDH even exists, is because they want to play to the letter of the law and they might be looking for opportunities.
Sure.
And so in the context of, like you said, Dana, is it causing any problems at the lower power level tables? No, because it's been regulated out of there. The social decks, or the social pods, I should say, don't need to worry about it. And the high power level folks, where anything goes, are the only ones that get to play it. I think that's totally fine. It's not going to affect games where people don't want to be playing against that type of deck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the issue with it is that the point of interaction is when it's on the stack. And that's not necessarily a suitable, that's the only point of interaction I have at bracket 2. But at bracket 3, yeah, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
Related to this is another card that's banned and has kind of a similar effect I want us to move to is Biorhythm. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious whether our thoughts about the likeliness of a coalition victory unban match up with the likeliness of a Biorhythm unban. That's also an 8-mana sorcery, this time in green. Each player's life total becomes the number of creatures he or she controls. I actually feel differently about this one. I think it's a bit more dangerous to unban this one. It also, to me, has that same anticlimax feel, like the game gets just kind of like, oh, I guess it just kind of ends. But this has some other effects that I am a little bit more cautious of. I'm wondering, though, where you guys are at with this one.
Yeah, so to clarify what Joey's talking about here a little bit, the problem with Biorhythm isn't necessarily the words in the card, because the words in the card say each player's life total becomes the number of creatures he or she controls. Just reading it at face value, you're like, okay, well, everyone's life total becomes 2 or 4 or 10 or whatever you have in place for creatures. That's not necessarily a problem, really. The problem is a board wipe, Biorhythm post board wipe. And even worse, you cast a board wipe to solve a problem, and then someone else casts Biorhythm. Like there's a lot. It discourages good play in some regards, I feel like, because you don't know what's going to happen. I don't think it's very positive for the format to feel like, oh, I don't know if I should wipe this green player's board because they're going to cast Biorhythm, but if I don't, I'm going to lose because they have a ton of creatures in play. Like I don't necessarily love that. So I like this less than Coalition Victory, but again, it's 8 mana and there's a lot of levers, and it ends games in a way that I don't enjoy. But it also, like, I don't feel like it necessarily ruins a game the way some cards do, maybe. So I like it less than Coalition Victory, even, which I didn't love. But there'll be cards I have larger complaints about than this one on this list.
Yeah. So for me, Biorhythm. So Coalition Victory and Biorhythm both, I think, are good pairs, or 2 good cards to pair with each other. At least with these 2 spells, the game is over. Like, actually over. Right. In these worst case scenarios that we're talking about here. That's not the case with Expropriate, which is still legal, which is a game changer. Right. Which may not actually be over, but effectively is over. And we still have to sit through one more person dominating the rest of the game. Those types of cards, I struggle to say that these should be banned when something like Expropriate still is legal. Game changer, but it's going to be at least regulated to, again, the higher power level tables where these types of things are expected. Answers are going to be probably a little more commonplace, counter spells, interaction just in general.
That's a really good point, Matt. I would, if I'm going to lose a game to something boring, I'd rather lose a game to something that I find boring in 3 seconds than lose a game to something I find boring in 10 minutes after you take your Expropriate turns and like run it out. So, no, that's a fair point.
And I think another thing too that people love to point out is Shaman of the Forgotten Ways only shows up in 1% of green decks anyways. And so I think that's a pretty good way to kind of look at the through line of, well, Biorhythm is, yes, there's more room to get abused, but I don't think it's going to show up in 1% of games even. If it makes itself into 1% of decks, I would be very surprised.
I caution against the comparison to the Shaman, though. If Biorhythm was an enchantment that said at the beginning of your upkeep this effect happens, or even if Coalition Victory was an enchantment that said at the beginning of your upkeep this effect happens, they wouldn't be banned. There's a point of interaction before the spell just resolves. Those are very different. And to me, the sword of Damocles that exists whenever the board is completely empty is still a concern that affects gameplay in a way that I don't necessarily love and wouldn't enjoy even in my bracket 3 decks. So to me, Biorhythm feels like a different creature to Coalition. So that's why I would say, personally, I hope that this one stays exactly where it's at.
I don't know. I think one thing just in general, and kind of my approach to a lot of these cards that we're going to talk about, is that we have a chance to kind of throw away our historically influenced paradigms in the way that we approach a lot of these cards, because we have a new opportunity to really reevaluate and be critical. And again, it's not so much how we, the 3 of us, like to approach the games, how we like them to end, because the brackets are all over the place. There's so much room for expression, and I could see a lot of people in those bracket 4 decks just really wanting a chance to go, like the motto of the bracket says, kind of everything's on the table, no holds barred, that type of approach. And I think these are fun things where, yes, it's not quite for me, and I only have one bracket 4 deck anyways, but I see where the appeal comes from, and it's not affecting games where I don't want to play against them either, which is the big thing that I think is going to give a lot of freedom for these cards to maybe get explored as being unbanned.
Oh my god, yeah, totally agree that this is a huge opportunity for us all to reframe our understanding of the ban list. The extra step for me boils down to whether unbanning a card and it becoming a game changer means it actually will be regulated by the brackets or not. If a card would get unbanned and then it is still just regulated to bracket 4 no holds barred, where it's things are mega powerful anyway, that's when I'm like, oh, yeah, cool, unban is justified, go off, gang. But if that card unbanning and becoming a game changer could still cause a problem even at the social brackets, or like when a bracket 3 deck brushes against bracket 2s in some pods, that's where I wish to proceed with caution. I feel like this is a good time for us to move into another green card, Matt.
It could be.
I think it's primetime time because
it is prime time.
This is one of those cards that is like especially a crux of this conversation as a super big potential candidate to come off of the ban list and become a game changer.
Primeval Titan is 6 mana for a 6/6 giant. It has trample, but most importantly here, it says whenever Primeval Titan enters battlefield or attacks, you may search your library for up to 2 land cards, not basic land cards, 2 land cards, and put them onto the battlefield tapped and then shuffle your library.
So more than any card that is currently banned, I love what Game Changers enables for Primeval Titan. Now, I've been pro unbanning for a while, but this is the perfect example of the card. It's not going to be at your bracket 1, bracket 2, the socially focused experiences first type of approach to deck building. This is going to be where resources matter and where people want to do the big splashy things. And one thing that I remember that stands out to me when Mana Crypt was banned was our friend Brian Kibler mentioned, I just want to play big, powerful things, and this is enabling me to do that. Primeval Titan is kind of the same thing to me, where it's big and powerful, and people that want to play at that power level, there's kind of the unsaid but agreed upon rule base where we're just going to do the most powerful things we can, and we're going to interact whenever we are kind of able to. I think Primeval Titan having that power level of, yeah, it's abusable, but that's what happens all the time in the format already, especially at those bracket 3, bracket 4 level decks. I think, again, we can throw the historical context out the window because we have this game changer layer now that we haven't had before.
So I hear that, but I think there's plenty of ways to do powerful things in the game. And I always feel a little bit like Primetime doesn't just enable you to do powerful things. It enables you to do twice as many things as everybody else and just dominate the game in a way that prevents anyone who's not playing Primetime from playing Magic at your level. And that's what I don't like about it.
Sure. And I get that. But also, if you're doing things, we say it's doing twice as many things as everybody else at the table. Well, everybody else at the table in this instance where Primeval Titan would, in theory, be a game changer, everybody else is doing things that are equally as powerful as Primeval Titan, even if it were unbanned, it's still very, very powerful.
So, Matt, I'm going to both agree and disagree with you here.
Okay.
So I'll just say on myself. So I actually do think that this is also quite a lot more likely than many of the other candidates that we'll discuss in this episode. It isn't a position that I hold personally, but I think that this is one that folks probably have their eye on who are in charge of unbanning some stuff. And I know that this is a drum that you've been sounding off for a really long time. To me, the stuff that Primetime is capable of doing, even at bracket 3, is kind of why it is banned. It certainly doesn't belong in a bracket 2. And if it could just
definitely
be
not.
relegated,
100% agree there.
Yeah. And if it could just be relegated to, this is really only showing up in like that bracket 4 type of area, I'm 100% on board with you. One of the little issues that I take though is that the idea is supposed to be that a deck at bracket 3 can still occasionally hang around with like a precon or whatever. And I don't know that decks that are doing primetime things are necessarily going to do that well. I think that they'll kind of raffle stomp a little bit. That's kind of my worry. If a 3 is supposed to be able to hang down with a 2, that's an experience that I think would end up being just a little bit unfortunate. And I also have some worries about like what Primetime does to deck construction. Playing a Primetime never means you're just playing a Primetime. The way that it would make a lot of mana bases look very, very similar with the ever-increasing toolbox of crazy lands that Wizards prints every single set, and the way that that homogenizes land bases, the effect that it has on deck building is also of concern to me. But with all of that said, Matt, I want to say, I still do think that you're probably right, that this is probably getting unbanned into a game changer. It seems like one of the likeliest possible candidates.
Yeah, I mean, so, and I do agree that it's the ripple effect on deck building 100% exists. And it's impossible to argue against that. I understand the concerns for sure. And again, it's maybe the game changers need to be added with, like, you have to make that consideration of, okay, if we unban Primeval Titan, we need more game changers, especially lands, to get named, because otherwise that's going to utterly dominate and prevent that. We want to keep that situation you mentioned, Joey, from happening. Because I do agree, a Primeval Titan, even just happening once against a pre-con level deck, a bracket 2 deck, is not going to go very well.
Yeah, I like that idea. Further expansions of game changer list. Good Jane show I feel about this for sure.
Yeah, Joey made the point earlier that, like, if we could guarantee we'd only see it in the 4 bracket, I would be so much more, like, comfortable with this. Mm-hmm. But I think the fact that it would be a game changer, and I would see it in a 3 bracket, and frankly, I'd see it in every 3 bracket deck that was running green. And this is the kind of card that I feel like people would have just zero self-control. And you made the argument, Matt, in our Discord, which you could join at patreon.com/EDHRECast, that there's a lot of nostalgic love for this card. And that's a really good point that I'd never considered. I do get why folks want to run it because of nostalgia. But that doesn't make me want to see it, right? Like, it's still going to be a card that I would see all the time. And this is the card I'm maybe dreading the most, not even necessarily because it's super powerful, although it is. But I just think every single green deck I lined up across from in that 3 bracket will be running a prime time, and that would get so old so fast.
I mean, but is it any different than every blue deck playing Cyclonic Rift and Smothering Tithe than every white deck?
Sure.
I don't think it really is.
Well, the one difference I would point out is, like, if someone casts Smothering Tithe or Rhystic Study and I remove it, then that's where things have ended for the most part. I guess they might draw a card off Rhystic Study or something. Mm-hmm. When someone casts a primetime, there's now a Nykthos in play along with a
Field of the Dead, making tokens, or Gaia's Cradle, a Glacial Chasm, stopping damage if they're playing that game changer too, or a Bounce Land and an Otawara or a Boseiju. So then it also came with a removal spell. And we're just barely scratching the surface, but yeah.
Right. And that's now 2 additional problems I have to deal with. And that's like the best case scenario for someone casting a primetime is they've now added 2 other game-changing threats along with that primetime. So it's just permanently altered the face of the game in the way some cards that you can respond to don't.
There's so many lands you can introduce, and it's not about any individual one being a problem, but having all those options is definitely like, whoa.
So yeah, Dana, I get it. The low end is an Hour of Promise, which is played in 34,000 decks. That's not a non-zero amount of decks. But you still have to answer it some way. So I get it.
Yeah, important difference.
Hour of Promise is a good card, but we also just don't see it a ton. Like, if you're only getting that, I think that's fine-ish. It's not great, but it's also still a powerful thing that people are doing. And that's the point of this conversation.
Sure. I kind of want to connect a thread here between the Primeval Titan and some other big creatures on the ban list as well. For as much debate as the 3 of us have about Primeval Titan, I don't think we have that same level of feeling about Sylvan Primordial.
No.
I think all of us are kind of like, no, keep that one gone.
Yeah.
That 7 mana, 6/8 reach. When it enters the battlefield for each opponent, you destroy a non-creature permanent they control, and you get a forest for each card that was destroyed that way. That one's... It especially feels just like this thing's way egregious in ways that even Primetime sometimes, like, I can see a world with Primetime. Sylvan Primordial, I do not want to see that world again. I've been there. It was a lot. And another big creature... Am I wrong, though, Matt? Am I wrong? It felt like it was a lot.
You're not wrong at all. So as I will admit, like, I think Primeval Titan would be a very fun, very high-powered card to add to the format. Sylvan Primordial should not be unbanned in all the ways that we can, say, well, what about this situation? What about this situation with any card? The end game with Sylvan Primordial being abused is the worst, because a lot of these cards that I think should be unbanned are additive, at least, whereas Sylvan Primordial, where it's not just additive, it's subtractive to your opponents. And that's where I think Sylvan Primordial and Sundering Titan both need to stay on the ban list.
Sundering Titan was the other one I was going to name as well. Sundering Titan, I think, is very likely to come off of the ban list, to be honest. Mm-hmm. When it enters the battlefield or leaves the battlefield, you choose a land of each basic land type and you destroy those lands. That effect sucks. I don't like it. I don't like it. But I think it would only show up in bracket 4. Since the mass land denial is a thing that doesn't exist in the social brackets 1 through 3, coming off of the ban list and going to a game changer, it is automatically relegated to a bracket 4 because mass land denial is a thing that is covered there. Sylvan Primordial is a little bit more wishy-washy about whether or not that counts as mass land denial. It's a value effect that I think a lot of people would kind of gun for. So that's why I think it should not come off. That should not be in bracket 3. But Sundering Titan self-asserts that is like, I am not in bracket 3 because I destroy some lands. So to me, I expect that this one is also a very likely candidate.
Yeah, Sundering Titan kind of, there's no plausible deniability there. You can't be like, what? I had no idea. Whereas maybe Sylvan has a little bit of that. So sure, I buy that.
I struggle to think that people are going to do it with the intent of having fun versus blowing up everybody's stuff.
But that's what happens in bracket 4, right?
Right. And don't get me wrong, I'm not arguing in favor of it. I'm just saying, like, I understand the logic and could see it happening.
Yeah, very, very much. There's an episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia where they're patronizing each other. Like, no, we could totally see that happening. I can't say that where like, no, I could totally see Sundering Titan being a positive card to add back in the format, even at bracket 4.
Oh, I don't like this card, just like Dana said. But there is a difference that I wanted to point out here, which you were touching on there earlier, Matt, that Primetime is proactive in a way that some other cards on the ban list aren't. And certain things of the Game Changer and Brackets list actually do address those proactive versus destructive effects. And the restriction on where mass land denial goes is one of them, which does kind of cover certain things that makes me feel like Sundering Titan would safely only ever show up in bracket 4, and I don't feel that comfortable making that claim about something like Primetime. A card that's very proactive is harder to negotiate yourself out of in pregame discussions. Talking about like, I don't know, I'm a little uncomfortable with a Primetime is a different discussion than when Matt says, I don't want to see a Turgid ever. One of those is more destructive and one of those is more proactive. And the difficulty of that conversation is an ingredient in my analysis here is all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, if it weren't for the fact that they made mass land denial such a point in the bracket announcement, and even on our interview with Gavin, he made a point, mass land denial is something we don't want to happen very often. If that weren't such a strong point for Wizards, I would have maybe believed it a little bit, but because it was so emphasized, I don't think that they're going to give Sundering Titan a chance to even be in like the best case scenario type of places that we're coming up with here.
Well, we keep challenging each other with these different thoughts and opinions about whether these cards will be unbanned. How about instead of challenging each other, we move to challenging some stats on EDHREC? A ham-fisted segue if ever there was one, but you know what? I'm sticking with it.
Joey, you stuck with us for a whole year while we were trying to hijack the segue in any way possible. Nothing you do will ever be as bad as that whole year.
That, honestly, one of the best years ever of the show. It was such a great time. Anyway, there's a lot of data on EDHREC, but we don't always agree with all of it, so stick around and we'll challenge some of the stats. This video is brought to you by Manscaped.com, the global men's lifestyle brand that is revolutionizing the landscape of men's grooming. As Magic players, we care a lot about getting the right look for our cards. We like to have the right printings, the right deck box, the right sleeves. It makes our board appear and feel so smoothly put together. And that's the type of care that we should give to our own selves too. That's why I've been using Manscaped products for years now. I've been such a fan of their trimmers. They have made personal grooming such a breeze. So quick, so simple, and Manscaped has a new Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra now too that I'm a big fan of. If you're a part of the OG Manscaped family, this trimmer is a tribute to the classics, upholding the same features that we've all come to love. A travel lock for seamless portability, USB-C charging, a comprehensive 3-level battery life indicator, a bigger LED light, and it introduces a dual temperature feature thoughtfully engineered to embrace and flatter multiple skin tones. Those hard-to-reach areas, consider them perfectly lit. And the best part, it's still waterproof. Join the 12 million men worldwide who've put their confidence in Manscaped for all things grooming and hygiene. Head over to manscaped.com and get your hands on the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra today. When you use our promo code EDHRE, you'll get 20% off plus free international shipping plus 2 free gifts. That's 20% off plus free shipping and 2 free gifts with promo code EDHRE at manscaped.com. Trust me when I say this, fellas, your balls will thank you. This episode is brought to you by Archidect. Archidect is our favorite deck building website of choice, and if you're familiar with our Upping the Average series on YouTube, you'll know I've been a big fan of this site for years now. Archidect is full of features that can take all the hassle out of deck building online. For instance, did you know you can drag and drop cards from either EDHREC or Scryfall right into Archidect, and it will add those cards to your deck for you? Whenever I brew, I already have a bunch of searches on EDHREC and Scryfall open in other tabs anyway, so literally just clicking and dragging cards right into my deck list saves me so much time. That way I don't have to type out every single dang card name. Not only that, but they also have a great system for you to create packages of cards too. If there's a group of cards that you know you're going to add to more than one deck, say a list of staples or favorite ramp effects, a counterspell or combo suite that you really enjoy and that you want to build around in more than just one list, or even just a group of pet cards, whatever the case may be, you can save those groups of cards as packages and easily add them to your decks when you're brewing, or even browse through other package ideas that other users have come up with. Archidect makes being a deck architect a total breeze. Check them out at archidekt.com. This episode is also brought to you by Spellify. Spellify is a hilarious magic card guessing game over on the website Commander's Herald. This game shows you a card but with all the text and art removed, and you can guess letters to fill in the blanks to try and identify what that card is. Think of it like Wordle, but with magic cards. See if you can guess the card by using as few letters as possible, just by recognizing how many letters are in its name or based on its activation costs and things like that, or see if you can guess it by not filling in any blanks at all. Real power move right there. There's even a Spellify hard mode for those extra daring aficionados out there. And of course, whenever you're done playing, Spellify's host site, Commander's Herald, is a great place to catch up on some of the spicy magic news of the day too. I know a lot of big names in Magic have been having a blast guessing the card of the day, so if you want to join in and have a little fun while you do, enjoy testing out your magic prowess over on Spellify.
So I'll get us started this week with our challenges. So I recently had a conversation with somebody who was playing a Coma World Eater deck, and I want to challenge not a specific card in this instance, but an entire category of cards that I think people aren't really playing right in these Coma World Eater, and the original Coma for that matter, type of decks. When you look at the typical deck, they're playing a lot of very high upside type of draw effects, cards like Orin Frostfang, cards like Enduring Curiosity, that I love both of those cards a lot. I play them in a lot of my decks. But one thing when you look at the average deck of these Coma decks is there's not really a whole bunch of grease the wheel type of effects. It's very, very easy. Having built a Coma deck myself, it's very easy to run out of steam very early in the game because you're not playing enough just basic card draw, card selection type of cards in there. Even cards like Ponder, Preordain, Serum Visions, cards that just make sure you're getting through your deck smoothly. Even like a quick study, even basic stuff like Chart a Course, those are just absent from the average deck for both Comas. And I think that is super, super wrong when you consider that these commanders are 7+ mana. They're super expensive to cast. You can run out, you cast your ramp spells, you play some lands, but then if you don't get to 7 mana exactly on time, it's very, very easy in these type of decks to get down to 1 or 2 cards, and you're not able to do much because the rest of your deck, the rest of especially your card draw engines, rely on you having a board state established already in order to be good. What you absolutely need to be doing is playing those smoothing out type of card draw effects that are just going to make sure you're hitting all of your land drops, you're not getting down to 1 or 2 cards and left top decking and turn 5 or 6. That's the worst case scenario where you don't hit enough of your lands to cast your commander, and those engines are just kind of sitting there because you don't have things going on right in order for them to work. So one thing I just want to challenge categorically is reevaluate your card draw suite. Make sure you have at least 5 or 6 just efficient draw cards to get you ahead and make sure you're not running out of cards in the early game. That way you can get to the mid and late game where Coma will actually take over the game.
Total cosign, Matt. Smooth out that early game. No notes. I appreciate that challenge, and I appreciate that you're taking challenge stats in a slightly new direction. Not just an individual card, but whole categories. Love it. All right, I'm going to move to my challenge here now. Guys, y'all remember Michaeloth? Remember when Michaeloth was good?
Was it? Was it ever? It was.
It was a strong card in 2011.
Yeah, it was good for like a short time. It was good for like this much time. Michaeloth is a 5 mana 4/4 fungus in green. It has Devour 2, so as it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice any number of creatures, and it enters the battlefield with twice that many +1 counters on it. So you could sacrifice, say, 2 creatures, and it'll have 4 +1 counters on it. And that's exciting because Michaeloth says at the beginning of your upkeep, you create a 1/1 green sapperling creature token for each +1/+1 counter on Michaeloth. This is a really cool looking card. I remember challenging this card way back on, it was like episode 20 or 22 or 25 or something like that of this show, because it showed up in the Marin of Clan Neltoth precon. Like, it's a cute synergy in Marin, but it's not a great synergy there. And over time, it's become a lot less popular in Marin, but there are other decks that I think it should become a lot less popular in as well. It is still currently the most popular in sapperling-focused decks like Slimefoot or the Myco Tyrant. And you know what? I totally understand that. Find all the ways that you can to make that certain specific type of creature token. I understand. But the fact that it's showing up in still a 5th of Azuri Claw of Progress decks or a 3rd of Essex Fractal Bloom decks, I think that you're kind of playing with fire there. A very common play pattern that occurs with Michaeloth is that you play it, sacrifice a couple of creatures, eating your own board, and then you hope to get some stuff on your turn, but Michaeloth is very, very dead before you get the chance for that to happen. It doesn't line up very successfully compared to the other things that green can do to more reliably make tokens. Michaeloth has, unfortunately, disappointed me quite a whole lot, and while the synergies that it could have with some other commanders out there look very, very nice, I think you need to find much more specific homes for this one than other decks that are currently playing it in sometimes a 4th or even a 3rd of decks out there. So be very cautious with Michaeloth. I think time has left this one a little bit behind, and it's probably currently overplayed.
And my challenge this week is brought to us by listener Jeremy, and it's for the new commander Hashaton Scarab's Fist. Hashaton is 2 mana in Orzhov colors for 1/3, and it says whenever you discard a creature card, you may pay 2 and a blue, and if you do, create a tapped token that's a copy of that card, except it's a 4/4 zombie. And Jeremy wants to challenge the lack of the card Cephalid Inkshrouder showing up in Hashaton decks. Cephalid Inkshrouder is 2 and a blue for an octopus, and it says discard a card from your hand, and Cephalid Inkshrouder can't be the target of spells or abilities and is unblockable this turn. It's currently in only 6 Hashaton decks, and Jeremy thinks it should see more play, and I tend to agree. It is a free discard outlet, and it can become an unblockable, unremovable zombie body, and that seems very good, especially in a deck where you're running a whole bunch of these zombie lords that make it even larger and even stronger. So yeah, I think a creature that comes into play can't be blocked and gives you a free discard outlet seems pretty solid in a deck that wants to discard stuff. So yes, if you're running Hashaton, take a look at Cephalid Inkshrouder. It's a solid card, and probably just doesn't see play because it's old and it's not been in the general Magic sphere in about 20-some years.
I like that one. I've used it occasionally in my Mimeoplasm deck here and there. Fun discard outlet and a fun target for Mimeo to become. This is a great pick. Thank you so much to Jeremy for submitting this challenge.
And as a quick reminder, if you want to check out any of these cards we've talked about today or in any of our challenge stats picks, make sure you head over to cardsphere.com. Whether you're trying to get value for your old cards, sending them out to people who will cherish them and play them, or you're trying to convert those into new cards that you're going to put into new decks, you can do all of that over at cardsphere.com. So make sure you click on the link in the description to sign up today and start trading over at cardsphere.com.
Okay, guys, so getting into the main topic once again, I wonder if this is a time for us to talk about the 4 cards that were most recently banned. Dockside Extortionist, Jeweled Lotus, Mana Crypt, and Nadu. We even heard from Gavin Verhey himself. He's like, Nadu can be yeeted into the sun. That one doesn't seem like it's ever going to be unbanned. And obviously, the situation surrounding like the history and the ugliness of what occurred when these cards were banned is... ugliness is the only word that I've got for it, really. I guess I just want to put forward these as, do you think that any of these could be eligible for potential unbans? Maybe not even immediately coming up soon, but like in the future. Do you think that that is a likelihood, or do you think that Wizards leaves these untouched?
I think the better question is, do you think Wizards unbans these, or do you think Hasbro unbans these?
Yeah.
Because there's definitely a financial thing at play here.
Yeah.
Hasbro absolutely would love to have these unbanned because then they can print them again and get them back going through that ecosystem. I hope Gavin Verhey has enough sway within the office to keep these banned. I struggle to want any of these back. By all accounts, and I don't play a ton of CEDH, But I have some friends who do, and they've said like CEDH is fine. It's not the world is ending type of scenario that a lot of people had that initial reaction of. So hopefully there's a world where these stay banned. But I don't know if that's going to happen, honestly.
Yeah, I think there'll be a grace period where we don't see these unbannings, but long term, something will get unbanned for the reasons you guys said, primarily the financial reasons.
Yeah.
And you know what? Like, given the bracket system, Jeweled Lotus is definitely less of a problem. Mana Crypt, I think, is definitely less of a problem. The one I want to see unbanned the least is Dockside Extortionist.
Yeah.
For kind of the same thing I said about Primeval Titan. I don't think people have the self-control to not jam it in every red deck they possibly can in the 3 bracket. That's what they were doing before. People will be doing that again. It's a frustrating card for that reason, that like when it comes down in the right game on turn 4, the person generates so much mana that like they're gonna win probably in 12, 15, 20 minutes, but they haven't won yet. And that's just a terrible state for the game to be in. I don't want to see that card back. Whereas I think like people tended to show some self-control with Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt, and we just probably wouldn't see them very much outside of the 4 brackets. So long term, I think we will eventually see these cards back. I just hope Dockside is not one of them.
So I don't know if players regulated so much as the prices of these cards.
Right, yeah.
The price didn't. The price helped for sure, yeah.
The price is what regulated Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus for sure. But I mean, Dockside got down there a little bit. It's getting back up there because I think people are anticipating it getting unbanned.
Oh, wow.
If I absolutely had to pick one of these 4 cards that would be unbanned, I probably would pick Jeweled Lotus. I'm with you there. But I do agree with you. Dockside is probably the one that I least would enjoy coming back because it was so anticlimactic, where at least these other cards were Jeweled Lotus. Like you said, it was very, very regulated on how you could use it. And so that, to me, Jeweled Lotus is the safest unban of these 4.
I'm absolutely with you there. Jeweled Lotus would be my pick, and that also strikes me as the pick that Wizards wants back to be able to sell things, as you were mentioning, Matt, in addition to that. And I think that there's also something to be said for, like, if in a pregame conversation you're naming, oh yeah, my game changer in this deck is a yada yada this, or I've got 2 game changers in this deck, it's the X card and Y card. If one of those cards is a Jeweled Lotus or a Mana Crypt, it seems easy to be like, I think I know what that game's going to be.
Sure.
Whereas if one of those examples is a Dockside Extortionist, that's muddier. Yeah. I don't know entirely what could happen there. And that ambiguity is what we're trying to rid ourselves of a little bit. So I completely co-sign with you guys on that, everything that you said there. So moving away from that topic then, what about some cards that are legendary that currently exist on the ban list, such as Arayo or Braid's Cabal Minion? There's a couple of legendary creatures that are currently on the ban list. Should they stay there, or should they join the ranks of some of the other legendary game changers like Urza Lord High Artificer or, Matt, your favorite, Turgrid? Where do we think that those might end up falling?
So one thing that Josh and Rachel over at the Command Zone had a really good conversation about the legends specifically existing in the Command Zone and that are on the ban list. Braids and Arayo at least are cards that I can see when people sit down to play. And if they say, oh, I have this Braids Cabal Minion deck, I can say, I'm not feeling like that. I really don't want to play against that type of deck. That's what I do with Turgrid to make sure that just that regulation is taken care of, because you see it in the Command Zone. Same with Arayo. I think both of those... Again, I'm not the one who wants to play with these types of cards, but I think there's players out there who want to play at these very, very high power levels where it's not going to affect me all that much because I can directly opt out of that, and it's very easy to. But again, it's additive. It's giving people a chance to do these types of things. And again, with game changers, the attitude for me shifts a little bit, where I used to say Braids never should come back. I think it could, and at least I would never have to worry about playing against it.
Yeah, I don't like any of these. I don't want to see any of these, but these feel the safest to me for all the reasons you guys mentioned.
Yeah.
You know, I'm never going to see them show up in the 2 bracket because they'll all presumably be game changers. In the 3 bracket, they'll almost always be in the Command Zone, so I can just opt out. So in terms of creating a unpleasant game experience, for the most part, because of the bracket system, it's just something that you can choose to avoid. And for at least me and the things that I don't want to have to deal with, that makes them relatively safe.
throwing my 2 cents in here because I co-sign with a whole lot of that, specifically when it comes to Arayo and Braids. I think if you listen back to some older episodes, I was on team, if you see this in the command zone, it's a game you can opt out of pretty easily. So they felt like safe unbans to me even before the game changer list existed.
Sure.
I will asterisk, though, that not all legends do I feel that way about. Rathalos, for instance, I have the same concerns about as some other very proactive cards. Negotiating yourself out of a game where a commander is very, very hardcore proactive feels a little bit more difficult to me than negotiating yourself out of a game where there's a Braids in the command zone or a Turgid in the command zone.
Yeah.
One of those things is very easy to point to as a problem that you just want to excuse yourself from. So Braids and Arayo feel safe to me in a way that Rathalos doesn't.
Yeah, Rathalos, I don't think is ever going to come back just because it's on the reserve list.
Oh, that too.
And so there's no financial motivation again for Wizards to bring it back, because if Rathalos gets unbanned, it immediately becomes a $200 card because so many people are going to try to get it the secondary market. It's going to do what it does. So I would be shocked if Rathalos gets unbanned, 100%.
Great point.
The only thing I would say, and I agree with all that, also, though, because of that factor, you probably would only really see it in the command zone. No one probably wants to put that in their deck and have it not be the centerpiece of the deck when it's expensive as it is.
Right.
So again, it would make it even easier to avoid. Some of these you might occasionally run into in a 3 bracket that are in a deck and you weren't ready for them. Rathalos, you would see it in the command zone. That's where it would be.
I don't know. A lot of people would want to proxy it in elf decks, Dana.
That's true. I mean, true.
So on this note, though, so we're talking about a lot of legends. What do you think about a card that I think a few years ago would have been absolutely sacrilege to suggest could be unbanned, but Emrakul Aeon's Torn. Do you think that the fact that like you can opt out of these games with Emrakul is worthy of giving it a shot? And I mean, it's 15 mana also. Like, if you're getting to 15 mana, you should win anyways.
It's 15 mana, or it's 1 mana with a sneak attack.
But even then, again, you put it in the 99 of a deck, you already have a lot of ways to get Annihilator. So I don't know if that's really that big of a deal either.
I tend to again agree. I think you're gonna see it in the command zone, so you can opt out. And if you are seeing it in a sneak attack style deck, I mean, it's worse than like some of the Ulamog options you could sneak out or something, but like, is it that much worse? I don't know. You could just, for the most part, probably avoid this if you didn't want to play against it. So again, while I don't want to see it back and don't think it necessarily adds very much to the format, I could live a life where this was not part of it, right? Like we could be in totally separate circles on a Venn diagram that never touch, and that makes it feel kind of okay for an unbanned to me.
Emrakul, with the effect of if you cast it, you get extra turns. It's flying, protection from spells that are 1 or more colors. Annihilator is 6, 15. According to the Rules Committee's old website, when this card was originally banned, it was banned due to overwhelming outcry from the community, who told us that ramping quickly into it was one of the most common and least interesting ways to win. Just reading quote there. An amazing colorless finisher, too tempting for too many decks. It does seem like the eyes were on this in terms of what it would do in the 99. To me, I kind of wonder if this also meets some of the Sundering Titan situations where Annihilator, it's not technically mass land denial, but like it's mass land denial. People could sacrifice tokens, but the thing that makes Annihilator good, especially Annihilator 6, is how many lands they're going to lose. And to me, that kind of means that it should only, it sounds like the type of card that wouldn't be in the social brackets where mass land denial doesn't exist. So it feels like a card that would only show up in bracket 4. So to me, maybe there's a safe to unban question mark going on in my head, I guess.
Yeah, we already, like I said, we already have several other Eldrazi Titans that already are doing Annihilator things, and I don't see them very often at all, especially in games that I'm playing. So I'm not terribly worried if Emrakul ever did come back, but I know that's also, like I said, it's not a very popular opinion, especially if just a few years ago.
We have a couple more legends. There's Grizzlebrand, there's Iona, Shield of Emeria, and Leovold.
Yeah, Leovold.
Emissary Trust.
Screw that guy.
The problem with these 3 in particular, I think, is these feel way more likely to show up randomly in someone's 99, making it a little bit harder to avoid them.
Even Leovold? 3 colors? Really?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's fair. If you can run Leovold, it's a ridiculously good card. But that's true. The 3 colors maybe make it less likely. But it still feels like the kind of thing that is
oppressively powerful,
possible to show up in a list in a way that, like, I just don't feel like Braids is going to show up in a deck where you're not expecting to see a Braids.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I had a Leovold deck. I would not like to see it put in the command zone. I think a lot of people, you would struggle to find games if you had a Leovold deck. If they bring back Cold Breacher, I think they would have a really hard time not bringing back Leovold. But I think both of those cards do a lot of unhealthy things.
Matt, you had like casually mentioned Cold Breacher just now. That one, no, keep that one banned. It's not coming back, and you don't want it.
I hope not. Of the three here, Gristlebrand, I don't think they would ever come back, just in general, because it's too ludicrously powerful. Iona Shield of America is the only one that I really could see coming back. So I could see it coming back and just doing absolutely nothing. Because if I remember when it was originally banned, well, that was also when you only had like 17 good angels to play in Commander. That's not the case anymore. It was kind of an unpopular ban. Anyways, people are kind of like, well, who's asking for this? And I understand why it was, but I also don't think it was affecting all that many games. And I think that would be the case again if it was unbanned now.
Yeah, we saw the data when it was banned. It was not popular.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Iona, you know exactly what you're doing to your opponents. There's really no like kidding yourself about what's happening. Whereas Grizzlebrand, because it's not removing things from the table or preventing things from happening, it's one of those cards where you're like, oh, it's just a really good card, I'm going to run it. So I think there's much more temptation with a Grizzlebrand to just jam it into your mono black deck than there is jamming Iona into your random mono white deck.
Yeah, Grizzlebrand to me, I'm just like, no, keep that one banned, absolutely.
Agree.
I think it is more of a problem than some of the other.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah, I do think the two most likely would be Leovold, because it is most likely to be a commander that therefore you can potentially avoid, a commander that would probably self-regulate. And Iona, I do also think would most likely. The problem that Iona represents is a problem for, I think, more of the bracket 2 area compared to the bracket 3 area. In a bracket 3 area, you're a little bit feistier, you're a little scrappier, and it's the type of thing that you are expecting some of those bigger hardcore interaction points. It's not a fun card. So again, a whole lot of these, I'm just like, if they came unbanned, it'd be kind of like, but it would make sense to me. So I could absolutely see this one becoming unbanned. I agree with you that one seems like one of the most likely of the legends that exist. You know, guys, we got to talk about the biggest legend that's banned as well. Golos Tireless Pilgrim. 5 mana artifact creature that's technically 5 color commander that enters the battlefield, finds you any land, and can pay 7 mana to play the top 3 cards of your library. Where are we at with Golos's ban? Would we want to see that one come off the list and become a game changer?
Nope, moving on.
Yeah, I tend to agree, because the problem with Golos is even if it's a game changer, and even if you can see it there, it still has the problem of replacing so many things.
Yeah.
And when I tell someone I don't want to play your Arroyo deck, like, it's kind of obvious why I don't want to play against it. But when someone's like, oh, I just wanted to build this cool 5-color Kindred deck, and Golos is obviously the best commander for it because it just is, that feels bad to try to opt out of, in a way that it doesn't necessarily feel bad to try to opt out of someone who has Emrakul as their commander. It's just such a weird, unique situation that kind of nothing else replicates. And I think it has to stay gone.
Golos's ban initially, I remember it surprising me, but after we did our huge data episode, watching its stats over time, where it just dominated the field as much as it did, and it didn't stop being among the top 10, if not number 1, for several months, dominating the top spots until it was banned. That position did not falter whatsoever. That is a huge sign to me of like how much deck diversity this card was eliminating when it was legal. And for that reason, yeah, I would also want to keep it banned to help encourage more deck diversity out there, and not have one commander that can speak to too many places and end up a little bit too ubiquitous in that regard. This feels not even like a gameplay health thing to me, but just a format health of just like, let's make sure that the decks that we can build feel a little bit zanier than this one thing being the go-to or the default for so many options. Yeah, I'm absolutely with you guys.
There's a phrase about something sucking the air out of the room. Golos sucked the diversity out of the 5-color commander bracket.
Yeah.
There's several things going on with Golos needing to stay banned. The deck diversity is absolutely one of the biggest ones, but also it was a contentious conversation that we just had. You know, there's points obviously for unbanning and keeping banned Primeval Titan. What if we just put it in the command zone? Because then you could have something enter the battlefield, search up any land, like search up that Nykthos or a Field of the Dead, whatever you want, and put on the battlefield. Like, Golos just does all those things from the command zone and makes it so much more egregious. So just as contentious as Primeval Titan doing its thing just by existing, that should be a testament to how powerful and how much the ban is needed when it comes to Golos Tireless Pilgrim.
Well, with Rathalos, Matt mentioned a card that probably wouldn't get unbanned because it's on the reserve list, and the price makes it very unattractive for most people. Library of Alexandria, even more so. I mean, it's already over $1,000.
Oh my word.
And for those who don't know, it's a land from Arabian Nights, and it taps for colorless mana. Or you can tap it to draw a card if and only if you have exactly 7 cards in your hand. So it's just probably never going to get unbanned because there's like 7,000 of these in existence, just period. The price, it's on the reserve list, so WotC can't sell them. There's just, it's not going to come off. However, I will make this note kind of in defense of it. It's a super powerful card. And if every single person I knew put a proxy of it in every single one of their decks, it would be powerful. But I can't imagine myself walking away from a game going, man, that library ruined that game and made it an unfun experience. Like, you have to have 7 cards in hand. You have to there's a lot of things you have to do to make it really, really good. And it's just not going to be the kind of card that I'm going to feel like is going to create a game state that something like Griselbrand will create, right? So
right.
It's not coming off, but if it did, I honestly, would not impact that much for a whole bunch of reasons.
Yeah, I 100% co-sign. I do not think text as written, this card should deserve to be on the ban list in a bracketed world. But given the other things that are around it and the number of things that it would affect on the price in the reserve list, there's no profit to be made off of this either. Yeah. There's not going to be a push for this one to be unbanned. So I think it could. I just don't think it will.
Yeah.
See, library is the type of card that it causes players to lose the game because they just don't care about it and they don't realize why, because they just gradually got to draw an extra 8-9 cards effectively for free. Mm-hmm. And yes, I've seen so many players misplay it, and I don't think a lot of folks fully realize and understand why this card was banned, and beyond just the price piece of it. Absolutely price restrictive. It will not be unbanned because of that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's sneakily like one of the most powerful cards in the format when it's legal.
It's just a great example of there are cards that are crazy powerful that feel bad, and there are cards that are crazy powerful that don't. And this is just one that even if I lost to it, I would be like, all right, well, that's a thing that happened. It just doesn't feel bad, and therefore I have a tough time arguing against it, even though it's just never going to happen.
Right. Yeah. Annoys me a whole lot less than a Caracas.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So the card that I want to put forth, and I'm curious what you two think about, is Gifts Ungiven. And so that's the card that it was kind of the bane of Modern for a little bit. And so Gifts Ungiven is an instant for 3 and a blue that says search your library for up to 4 cards with different names and reveal them. Target opponent chooses 2 of those cards. You put those into the graveyard and the rest into your hand. So it's effectively in Commander, 2 for 4 cards, put 2 in the graveyard, the other 2 in your hand. The way that Commander works, everything's singleton, so the different names just does not matter. But it's such a powerful synergy. I'm curious what you two think of possibly getting a gift in this card coming back.
Well, and Matt, don't forget, there's also the fail to find trick here with Gifts Ungiven, where you can only get 2 cards off of it, and then those go automatically to the graveyard, and people use that for some graveyard tutory shenanigans as well. This one, the more I thought on it, the more likely it feels to me, because this card is, to my estimation at least, effectively a bracket 4 only card.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want more tutors in the format. I don't think we need that, but I do think that a lot of the conditions of the early brackets do cover where tutors go. And not only that, but they also cover where a deck that is intending to do combo goes. And Gifts Ungiven is really powerful because of the ability it has to facilitate a combo with a low amount of interaction points within setting that combo up. That means that's what that deck is designed to do. And if your deck is designed to do an early combo, that is a bracket 4 thing. That's not a bracket 3 thing.
Yeah, 100%.
So I don't like it, but I consider this kind of probable.
I can see it definitely coming off the ban list too. To a degree, maybe the argument against it is kind of a mirror of the Rafaelos Library of Alexandria argument. We talked about WotC maybe wanting things like Jeweled Lotus or Primetime Unbanned to sell packs. Gifts Ungiven has been printed 10 times, and every copy is 75 cents. There's no financial incentive necessarily to unban it from WotC's point of view. That doesn't mean they won't do it, but there isn't that external push on it like you might see with some other cards. So I think that might keep it from being something that we see sometime soon. But I agree with what Joey said. It's the kind of thing that if you weren't playing in the space where folks want to be casting a 4-mana spell that wins them the game, which is what this is going to be most of the time, then you don't have to worry about it. And I kind of wouldn't have to worry about it, so that's probably fine.
Yeah, the fact that tutors are actively kind of pushed up a bracket or two, and this just being a big tutor in addition to being a game changer, I could see people not wanting to use one of their game changers on tutors. And I'm curious, as we get more data in this bracketed world, what tutors do, especially with numbers. But Dana, I also, just to push back just a little bit, I also think that, yes, it is a 50-cent card right now. If it got unbanned, I think that price would very much change pretty quickly and be worth the price of a pack for sure. So I would be very curious what the price of that does. That's just another opportunity for Wizards maybe to look at printing or reprinting this card again. But I would love to see what happens if this did get unbanned, because I think it does enable a lot of shenanigans that people want to do at those bracket 4 decks. Joey, what you said, I 100% agree with.
Oh, cool. I'm wondering whether you feel the same way about the card Flash.
Ooh.
Which was banned because of what it was doing to the CEDH levels of the format. It was like, that was the deck du jour in CEDH. I think there's a lot of my same arguments about Gifts Ungiven, I think would also apply to the card Flash. I'm not quite convinced, though. I don't have enough experience in CEDH to know whether that still might be too much of an issue or not. But I'm just kind of curious.
I would be equally as shocked as if like a Griselbrand were unbanned, because of just how ubiquitous it was at the CEDH. I know the folks on the Commander format panel that are there kind of as the CEDH representation 100% do not think Flash should ever come back. And that was kind of the big community push I remember about Flash, was every CEDH player was saying, it's not Protean Hulk that is the problem. It is the Flash. It is the Flash enabling these things to happen way too early than when they should be happening. So I would be very, very surprised if Flash was able to make a comeback.
Okay.
So it's worth noting Flash was banned almost exactly 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. The ecosystem has changed considerably since then. Whether or not it's changed in a way that would make it safer or even less safe, I guess, I don't know. But I would say it is different than it was. I will also note that Flash was a card that if you weren't playing in an ecosystem where people did things like Flash Hulk or whatever they were doing with it, it didn't exist. So like, that's a perfect example of a card like a couple of the ones we've talked about where you say, well, if I'm not playing at that power level or that bracket, I'm just never going to see it, so maybe it's fine. Flash was one of those cards. It was a problem almost exclusively in CEDH. Mm-hmm. Would it still be a problem there? I'm not qualified to even comment on that. But it is a card, at least back then, where like it just didn't exist if you weren't playing CEDH. It was just not a card that saw play.
Yeah. If the CEDH format would not be too rattled by this thing being unbanned, I think it is another of the most eligible possible candidates.
Sure.
But yeah, it really, again, goes back to that with the Gifts Ungiven thing that you were mentioning earlier, Matt, about like, is this card here dedicated to combo? All right, well, dedicated combo decks that are trying to do that early and do it really well, that's a bracket 4 and up thing. So then brackets 3 and below are really safe from it. And to me, that meets the requirements of like, all right, could be unbanned then. That actually was me throwing an extra one in here. There was an entirely different card that I was going to mention as a potential card that could unban.
Classic Joey going off the script. All right.
Hey, listen. Sometimes the thoughts just happen in my brain and then I say them. And now we're in this moment.
That's fair.
So the other card that I think we might round out this episode with kind of calls back to both Biorhythm and Coalition Victory, and that's Sway of the Stars, the 10 mana blue sorcery that resets the game, but everyone's at 7 life, more or less. That's what it does. To me, even before the game changers, this was one of the safest possible cards to unban, because I don't think people will play it. I think it would get the Worldfire treatment. Like, Worldfire was unbanned, and it's showing up in barely 9,000 decks right now, which is not a lot considering how many decks could be playing this thing. I think it wouldn't even be a drop in the bucket. I don't think anyone's gunning to play this thing. I think it's boring and uneventful, but I don't think people are like gunning to go and play it. So I think it would be a safe unban, and I personally anticipate that this could be another big card to come off of that list and go on to Game Changers instead. If you guys disagree with me, though, totally want to hear it.
I would wager to go so far that Sway the Stars could be unbanned, and it wouldn't be a game changer, and people still wouldn't really care. I mean, it's 10 mana.
Sure.
Oh my God, love it.
It's 10 mana, and it's a card where, like, again, you can't tell yourself you're not sure what it was doing to the game. Like, you know exactly what's up. So you're playing it probably, you know, again, unless, like, we can't control trolls. But everyone else, you know what you're doing. So it's only going to show up in situations where people want to be doing that, and presumably the pod wants to be on the other end of that. it would just be a non-event for the most part. I don't want to see it in games, but I wouldn't. So
Right.
that makes it pretty safe.
I would go so far as to say Sway of the Stars would kind of do the same thing that it felt like Protean Hulk did when it was unbanned, where people did the thing once or twice, and then they kind of regulated it to where it's going to be most appropriate,
Sure.
if they even kept playing it at all.
Right.
I think that probably would happen to a lot of the cards that we've talked about, where if they get unbanned, they're going to cause a splash when they're immediately unbanned, and then they pretty quickly go to the wayside because people either did the thing with Coalition Victory, and then they wanted to move on to something more interesting.
All right, totally love it. There are a lot of other cards that are on the banned list that we didn't mention. Maybe a handful here and there we like kind of obliquely referenced, but earlier I said Hull Breacher, that's going to stay where it is. there are a few of those. Mm-hmm. And as we round the episode out, I want to make sure that we have time to mention any cards that you think maybe a lot of folks out there are discussing that you think definitely should not be turned into game changers. What cards should definitely stay on the ban list, do you think? Like the Power 9, for instance. Like those aren't going anywhere.
Right. Yeah. So I have two for the same reason. Paradox Engine and Prophet of Krufix. And the reason is, in my experience, and again, these have been banned for 5+ years, so maybe the world has changed, but I don't know if it has. People had no self-control for these cards. They just jammed them in any deck where they could jam them, and they played them poorly a lot of times in ways that soaked up everyone's time, and more importantly, wasted my time. And I don't want to see them unbanned because for that reason, they just led to miserable slog games where you had to burn your phone battery down because you were bored as someone tapped and untapped stuff with Prophet of Krufix and Paradox Engine, or God forbid both. So I don't want to see them unbanned for those reasons, because a lot of these cards I would be able to dodge if I didn't want to see them because they would get regulated to places I don't play. That wouldn't be the case with these. And therefore, I just don't think they're safe to unban because I don't know if folks have the self-control to not use them everywhere.
I would sooner make Seedborn Muse a game changer than have these cards be unbanned and become game changers.
Yes, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have nothing else to add to those arguments, so I'm going to throw two more into the ring here that I just don't think should ever become unbanned. Channel and Fast Bond both are just...
Yep.
Sure. Those are the monsters that I would wager a lot of folks think Primeval Titan actually is, where you just get so many more resources than the rest of the table, so much faster than what everybody else is able to do. Like you can do a Fast Bond on turn 1, the game might effectively just be over. And that's
in 20 minutes. It wouldn't be over then. It would be over in 20 minutes.
In 20 minutes.
Yeah.
But both of these cards do things that they're extreme resource acceleration, and they're doing it in the first turn of the game. Sometimes first 2 turns, whatever. But once those happen, the game is effectively over. So especially with CEDH being significantly better represented on the Commander format panel for the sake of CEDH, but especially just casual tables as well, Channel and Fast Bond need to stay away from anything regarding any sort of legality.
To be honest, I think a whole lot of the ban list that we haven't yet discussed is there for a good reason, and I don't think anyone is gunning for a whole lot of these cards to come off the ban. Like limited resources, I think everyone's kind of like, maybe it can stay there, because that's not mass land denial. That's mass no one plays anything, for instance.
That's just denial, yeah.
Scheherazade, no one needs it. Like a whole lot of those are not necessarily the kind of things that I think will be up for quite a lot of discussion.
I will just note this. Once, many, many years ago, playing in a multiplayer game on the floor in a college dorm room, someone cast a Scheherazade. So we moved our second sub game, and then someone in the sub game cast a Ring of Maroof to go get the Scheherazade from the previous game and cast it in that game, making us play a third sub game. I've done that. It was funny, and no one ever needs to do it again.
That just is going to make so many rough experiences, Dana. I get it.
Yeah, and also cards like Yawgmoth's Bargain. Don't let me have that. Don't let me have that. Paying life to draw cards. Dana and I cannot be allowed to do these kinds of things. So I think a big remainder of the ban list is the kind of stuff that we can be pretty safe in assuming this probably won't go to places. I think there's maybe a question mark on Panoptic Mirror, because we know that that's usually a combo card, but it's also not always a combo card. So like for me, I wouldn't want to see that in bracket 3 decks either. Even if someone puts a board wipe on it and they're for free casting a board wipe every turn, it's just like, please miss me with that. So there are a lot of those cards that I'm just like, Yeah, I don't think these would safely regulate themselves into bracket 4. And even in bracket 4, I'm kind of like, oh, the game's all about just that now, isn't it? So most of the ban list, I feel like, yeah, keep it where it's at.
Yeah.
Aside from a lot of the stuff we discussed, yeah.
I mean, there's a couple cards that I think have arguments to be unbanned, but I don't think that they should be. Recurring Nightmare is one. I would love for Recurring Nightmare to be a thing. I would build a Reanimator deck if that was the case. But the play patterns and, the fact that it's on the reserved list, it's not going to get unbanned for that reason.
Yeah.
And then Trade Secrets is another card that I think
is
very curious, but the social way that it interacts, especially with tournament level CEDH being a significant thing these days, the collusion already seems to be like such a problem in those groups. I think that's only going to make it worse. So Trade Secrets just really needs to keep its banned status up to date there, because there's no way this is going to come back.
Sure.
Yeah, 100% cosign. I think most of the most likely candidates that could become unbanned are things that we discussed earlier on in the show, and a lot of the remaining ban list can stay right where it is. As a caveat on this, though, when we were talking about the game changers and the brackets, and especially whether the ban list will be affected by this development if the bracket system becomes a very successful system for players, I want to point out, like, on our last episode, we had hypothesized about changes that could happen in the bracket system. Like, what if in bracket 2, one game changer card was allowed? Matt, I think that might have been a suggestion that you threw out there. I am personally coming way off of that idea when we're discussing the idea that any of the cards that we discussed today could become unbanned and turned into game changers. A lot of these are not the types of things that I want to see at bracket 2, and to have just that clean dividing line, I'm like, if things do change in the ban list to game changer, I hope that they don't change in the bracket to no game changer situation. So that's a thing that I wanted to mention here real quick. There are a couple of changes that could happen, but I hope that that's not one of them.
Yeah, Joey, as you said that we had mentioned about allowing one game changer into bracket 2, I was like, oh, my thoughts on that have completely changed.
Yeah.
If we talk about unbanning some of these cards. So no, that I hadn't put 2 and 2 together, and upon you saying that, I had the same thought immediately that nope, that changes my opinion on that completely.
I saw you do like one of your sage nods over there.
Yeah.
One of those tap your nose and like, yeah. It was
oh, yeah, that's a great point.
I also want to do one last thing in this episode, you guys. I am kind of curious whether you'd like to make a bet about how many cards might be unbanned. Is that something that you might be interested in doing, like an over-under on number of cards that could be affected with the game changer status? Since Wizards has said that they are discussing unbans, what do you think might happen, and do you want to bet on it?
So I think one of the things I think that matters are they going to expand the game changer list? If they are like, yeah, we're going to expand the game changer list to 50 cards, and they leave it at that, they don't say anything beyond that, then I could very well see them knocking 5-6 cards off the ban list and making them game changers, as well as then adding a couple cards or something. If we're reliant on them removing the cards from the game changer list in order to remove cards from the ban list, that gets way trickier, because I don't know how much fat there is to cut off that list currently, aside from like maybe a Trouble in Pairs or maybe a Jessica's Will style card. And even those, like, I don't think are a bad thing to have in the game changers list. So I think that's what it comes down to. Are they going to expand the list or leave it where it's at?
Yeah, it's really hard to say one way or another. So if we can figure out, and maybe we do this before the next episode airs, we'll figure out the exact conditions of this wager that you're proposing, Joey. Okay. Because I am absolutely a gambling man. I will make wagers, and maybe we put like a collector booster on the line for whoever's closest by the next time they update this. But I would be very curious. But it's so hard to say, I want to make this specific wager, because there's so many ways that they could take this entire conversation. So it's not going to be very good radio for us to sit here and hash out those types of details. But yes, before the next episode, we'll figure out we'll update all you listeners on what the terms of this wager are.
Yeah, or frankly, we could even hear from listeners what they think it should be. But then again, they might come up with a punishment I don't like oh, my graveyards are exiled forever. So maybe not, maybe never mind.
Done. Yeah, whatever the wager is.
I better be correct with my wager. I think the amount will end up being high, personally.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know that it will go into double digits, but I personally think that it'll probably do like 8 or 9 cards, is an anticipation of mine.
If they tell us the game changer list is going to 50 cards, I'm going to guess that we're looking at 6 to 8 that come off as well.
8 sounds like a number. I think they would add in a couple of the game changers they missed in the first round, maybe like a Great Henge, something like that. And then they would mostly focus on, if they expanded the Game Changer list, I would urge they mostly focus on getting cards that are currently banned onto the Game Changer list instead. That's where I would wager the focus is.
Yeah. If we're making wild predictions, they bump it to 50 is what I would guess.
Sure.
And see, I think that the Game Changer list could expand even further, personally. But I think both of those things might happen at the same time. I think
I don't love the idea of it getting too big, but I get where you're coming from, though, Joey.
Yeah. This is a lot of change in the air. But what's interesting to me is how easily we seem to have gotten on to this system, and the types of discussions that it's sparking are very interesting. Like, I've really loved going over this whole thing with you guys with this lens. There are some cards that we don't agree on, but like, I also still totally understand where you're coming from with them. And even having that extra layer that, Matt, that you were mentioning of like, okay, there's a little bit more regulation that we can expect here. How will that affect whether this shows up in 3s or in 4s? Yeah, that's interesting. That's very interesting to me. So I'm looking forward to these transformations that may occur in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think the Game Changer list definitely like makes the catastrophic situation less catastrophic. There are, cards in the ban list that 6 months ago, if you told me I was going to get a ban, I'd be like, the worst case scenario there is very bad. And now I feel like the worst case scenario is I just don't see it because I can avoid where it would show up in a bracket.
Yeah, it's nice to have extra tools that help us out with those pregame conversations.
Yeah.
Listeners, this has been a really interesting one. I'm sure that y'all out there have a lot of opinions about which cards could become unbanned and become game changers, or which cards are still eligible to become game changers. Let us know your thoughts. And if you want to discuss even further with us, you can also hit up our Patreon Discord if you want to get even further into the weeds, because we've been talking a lot with our Patreon members over there too. This was so much fun, you guys. We're going to call this episode to a close. If our listeners want to get in touch with us, where can they find us on the onlines? Matt?
So you can find me on pretty much any social media platform at Mathimus55. That's MATHIMUS55. And don't forget, if you want to support the show, you can do so by getting yourself some amazing Dragon Shield sleeves. Click on the link in the description below, which is going to get you a sweet little discount to get some of the best sleeves on the market. So make sure you check out Dragon Shield for all of your card protection needs.
And Dana?
You can find me online at Dana Roach. I'm mostly snarking around on Blue Sky these days. I'm writing articles for EDHREC and Commander's Herald, and you can find all of us together at patreon.com/EDHRECast.
And you can find me everywhere online, from Instagram to Blue Sky at Joseph M. Schultz. And you can find the cast online at EDHRECast. Plus, if you got a question for us or perhaps a challenge to stat submission you'd like to let us know about, you can contact us at EDHRECast@gmail.com. Listeners, we'll be back at you next week with more data and insights. But until then, remember, EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck.